22 operating budget under Charter 305 and 2060 to 2063 of the county code. The guidelines must be based on affordability rather than need and may be higher or lower than those considered at the public hearing. The guidelines establish a ceiling subject to a subsequent 7-vote council override on the aggregate operating budget, recommended agency spending allocations, and a ceiling on the property tax revenues. A GO committee work session is tentatively scheduled for Monday, February 1st, 2021. Persons wishing to submit additional material for the council's consideration should do so before the close of business today. Each individual will have 2 minutes to speak. Individuals will be alerted as they approach their 2 minutes and may be disconnected. Also, there may always be technical glitches during the public hearing that may need to be addressed by our staff, so thanks in advance for your patience. Ms. Kennedy, do we have speakers for this public hearing?
No speakers for this hearing.
You have to announce what it is. Yeah.
I beg your pardon. Well, I think the notes are out of order here. Number 6 is the public hearing on the spending affordability guidelines for the FY22 operating budget.
Right, there are no speakers for that public hearing.
Thank you. Okay, well, on to item 6. Item 6 is the public hearing on expedited bill 5020, the landlord-tenant relations, fire safety, removal of mercury service regulators. There's a Fed committee work session tentatively scheduled for February 8th, 21. This is a public hearing on expedited bill 5020, landlord-tenant relations, fire safety, removal of fire service regulators. This bill would require landlords to provide certain notices to tenants, require landlords to schedule the replacement of indoor mercury service regulators, and generally amend the law regarding landlord obligations and landlord-tenant relations. A Fed committee work session is tentatively scheduled for Monday, February 8th, 2021. Persons wishing to submit additional material for the council's consideration should do so before the close of business on February 2nd. Also, if you would like to follow the progress of a council bill, the council website has a subscribe function. Go to the council website and use the View Council Records and Legislative Updates link to learn how. Ms. Kennedy, could you introduce the speakers for this public hearing, please?
Yes, I can. We have a few speakers for this public hearing. Each one of them will have 2 minutes to speak. I would like to acknowledge Mr. Alicio Magos, who is here to help us with interpretation with one of our speakers. Our first speaker for this public hearing is Asim Nagam.
Good afternoon, Council President, Council members. My name is Asim Nagam, for the record, Director of the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. I'm here on behalf of the County Executive in support of Bill 5020, Fire Safety Removal of Mercury Service Regulator. This bill establishes a mechanism for identifying indoor mercury service regulators in rental properties and requires DHCA to establish a database of the properties identified as having indoor mercury service regulators. DHCA supports the objectives of this bill for removal of the indoor mercury service regulators, will work with the bill sponsor as needed on any changes, and will implement the required reporting as defined in the final bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker for this public hearing will be Chris Gillis.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Chris Gillis, and I'm testifying on behalf of MHP in support of Bill 5020. Following the introduction of the bill, we ourselves discovered that one of our properties had a mercury service regulator. We have since contacted Washington Gas to arrange for its replacement. Were it not for this bill, its presence may have gone undetected. Notwithstanding our support, we would like to suggest one tweak regarding the bill's notification requirements. As drafted, the bill requires property owners to notify DHCA and all tenants if a mercury service regulator exists on the premises. We have no issue with informing DHCA about the presence of the regulator as soon as it is discovered, but we worry that if tenants are notified before the replacement, it could cause panic among tenants about the perceived safety of the property, or worse, motivate tenants to move out. The pre-notification requirement may also generate questions from residents that the property owner is unable to answer, such as the timeline for the replacement of the regulator. We support the concept of notifying tenants once the regulator has been replaced, but alerting them to the presence of the regulators before they have been removed could have unintended consequences. Thank you for considering our views.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker will be Nicola Whiteman. Ms. Whiteman, you may begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicola Whiteman, and I am testifying on behalf of AOBA in support of Bill 5020 with amendments. Notably, the amendments which I will discuss are consistent with the stated purpose of the bill to facilitate the replacement of mercury indoor regulators, or MSRs, in multifamily communities. First, it is important to highlight the December Maryland Public Service Commission order, which addressed and settled many of the concerns that give rise to the bill. The Commission's order notably reaffirmed the gas company's obligation to locate and replace the MSRs. This responsibility includes notably conducting a survey of the remaining MSRs. We understand that the gas company will commence this important survey in February. In addition to the PSC order, pending before the Maryland General Assembly is a bill that will require the gas company to relocate MSRs to the exterior of buildings to address safety concerns. Given the PSC order and given the pending legislation before the General Assembly, the proposed joint amendments from AOBA and Washington Gas focus on the following issues. One, access by housing providers to facilitate the gas company's MSR replacement program. While the obligation to locate and replace the MSRs are governed and, as I noted, settled by the PSC order, housing providers can and should play an important role in facilitating the gas company's access to rental housing in order to successfully implement the MSR replacement program. Secondly, our amendments retain language regarding the notification of housing of residents and DHCA. Third, we do clarify, consistent with the PSC order and the MSR replacement program, that the focus is on the replacement and not just the removal of these devices. And finally, specifying for safety reasons that tenants have an obligation to refrain from touching, damaging, or otherwise interfering with these devices. Finally, AOBA commends Councilmember Hucker and Washington Gas for the opportunity to collaborate on the proposed amendments and really have a very thorough discussion on this important issue. Adopting the bill with these changes will complement the PSC order by helping to facilitate the MSR replacement program, thus ensuring the safety of the residents and employees in multifamily communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Brian Smith. Mr. Smith, you may begin.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy, and good afternoon, Council members, Council President Hucker. It's good to see you all virtually. Thank you for the time. I'm Brian Smith here on behalf of Washington Gas. Nicola did a tremendous job in sort of outlining background for this bill, and we'd also like to thank you, Council President Hucker, for engaging with us on the amendments we've proposed. You know, Nicola mentioned that December 18th order from the Commission. Within that, they approved Washington Gas's plan to survey all multifamily within a year, within 3 years, survey all non-multifamily, and begin the replacement of that equipment all within 5 years. Nicola mentioned we're prepping to get started, and I did receive a note from a colleague that our contractor's onboarding folks as we speak, with the goal of getting started early February. So thanks for having me today. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ana Martinez.
Good afternoon. My name is Ana Martinez. Apologize. Lead organizer with CASA, largest immigrant rights organization in the Mid-Atlantic region with over 100,000 members. I'm here in support of Bill 5020, removing the mercury regulators out of apartment buildings in a county. 5 years ago, there was an explosion at the Flower Branch Apartments that led to the deaths of 7 residents, including 2 children. Community members still remember that evening, and many live with the trauma to this day. The Public Service Commission of Maryland released the information that Washington Gas had committed to remove the mercury regulators by 2013, 3 years prior to the explosion. How is it possible that 8 years after the deadline has passed and 5 years after the explosion, this commitment has not been fulfilled and there's no proper record keeping of where the mercury regulators are located? We must hold utility companies accountable to take this process seriously, as well as management companies to collaborate in the process so that all mercury regulators are identified and removed, as well as have the proper record keeping that is accessible by the public and the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. I do ask the Council to take this important step in passing this bill, as well as make a commitment to take further actions in order to protect residents when it comes to gas safety. The National Transportation Safety Board did a 2-year investigation after the Flower Branch explosion It made many recommendations that the county could consider. This includes the emergency dispatchers should alert gas companies when order calls are received. Regulators need to be moved outdoors, require methane detectors for all types of residential occupancy, and ensure that apartment complex has the same inspection and safety protocols as individual home, which is a form of housing discrimination. I ask that we hold management companies accountable, and that when we ask, when they have complaints regarding gas, that they're taken seriously, not just when it comes to regulators, but from faulty old ovens or other gas sources, other concerns, that other concerns are taken seriously. In 2019, years after the explosions, tenants smelled gas from the regulators at the Flower Branch apartments, and the management utility company failed to respond properly.
Ms. Martinez.
For your time.
Ms. Martinez, I'm sorry to interrupt, but your time is up. Thank you very much for your testimony. Our next speaker is Sofia Reyes. Ms. Reyes, you may begin.
Señora Reyes, puede abrir su micrófono para dar su testimonio, y señor Eliseo, también usted puede interpretar.
Ok. Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Sofía Reyes. Soy miembro de la Asociación de Inquilinos de Flower Branch Apartment y ex residente de los apartamentos.
Good afternoon. My name is Sofia Reyes. I am a member of the Flower Branch Apartment Tenants Association and a former resident of the apartments.
Hoy estoy aquí para hablar sobre la importancia del proyecto de ley 5020.
Today I'm here to talk about the importance of Bill 5020.
Quiero agradecer al Consejo por darme la oportunidad de testificar a favor de este proyecto de ley.
I want to thank the Council for giving me the opportunity to testify in favor of this bill.
Dado que este proyecto de ley es muy importante tanto a nivel personal como para mi comunidad.
Since this bill is super important personally as well as for my community.
Yo estuve ahí en el 2016 cuando nuestro edificio explotó frente a mis ojos. Nunca olvidaré ver que nuestro edificio estaba en llamas.
I was there in 2016 when our building exploded in front of my eyes. I will never forget seeing our building on fire.
Y recuerdo las imágenes de personas saltando desde los balcones como que si fuera ayer.
I remember the images of people jumping from the balconies like it was yesterday.
No hay palabras para describir el trauma que tengo, tanto yo como mi comunidad hemos enfrentado.
There are no words to describe the trauma that both I and my community have faced.
Se perdieron 7 vidas, incluso 2 niños.
7 lives were lost, including 2 children.
Docenas de personas perdieron sus hogares.
Dozens of people lost their homes.
Han pasado más de 4 años desde ese horrible día y aún así no he visto lo suficiente como para asegurarme de que nunca vuelva a suceder.
It's been over 4 years since that horrible day, and yeah, I haven't seen enough to make sure it will never happen again.
Ahora con este proyecto de ley veo un poco más de esperanza que cambiando todos los reguladores de mercurio podemos estar salvando vidas y evitando tragedias como la que ocurrió en el 2016.
Now with this bill, I see a little more hope that by changing all the mercury regulators, we can be saving lives and avoiding tragedies like the one that occurred in 2016.
Miembros del Consejo, les pido que tomen esta ley muy en serio, que la ley pueda salvar vida de los inquilinos en nuestro condado y evitar que tragedias como esta vuelvan a ocurrir.
Members of the council, I ask you to take this law very seriously now that this law can prevent and save lives.
Gracias por su tiempo.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Kiran Prisore. You may begin. You have 2 minutes.
Sperry.
Good morning, good afternoon. I hope I can be heard. Council President, Mr. Hucker, and other members of the council. I just want to let you all know that I support this bill, and it is my desire that council members will also vote to approve this bill, because I know it has been a personal mission of Council President Hucker for this bill to be brought forward and to pass. So all I'm asking is for your support, and after that bill is passed, which I hope it will, that we can hold a public commission words and let have people to see that it is enforced, because it's one thing to have it passed, but we need enforcement. And I know that Mr. Hucker and his members will see to it, but I'm just hoping and praying that you all will follow through. So I thank you, council members, again for this bill, and it is my hope that it will pass. Thank you so much for all you have done.
Thank you, Kieran.
Thank you, sir. That wraps up our speakers for this public hearing.
Terrific. Thanks to all the speakers. I greatly appreciate it. Council, the hearing on item 6 is closed, and that closes the, on item 5, and that closes the hearing on Council 6. Item 7 is a public hearing on a special appropriation for the FY21 operating budget, the Office of the County Executive, $500,000 for the Connected DMV contract, Global Pandemic Prevention Center, source of funds, general fund reserves. There's a Fed HHS committee work session tentatively scheduled for January 28th, 21. Persons wishing to submit additional material for the council's consideration should do so before the close of business today. Ms. Kennedy, do we have speakers for this public hearing?
There are no speakers for this public hearing.
Thank you. That closes this public hearing. Item 8 is a public hearing action on the special appropriation to the county government's FY21 operating budget, Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation, NDA, $4,938,298 for Restaurant Relief Grant Program. The source of funds is state aid, and an amendment to the FY21 operating budget resolution 19472, Section G, designation of entities for non-competitive contract award status, Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation. Action is scheduled for immediately following this hearing. Ms. Kennedy, do we have speakers for this public hearing?
No speakers for this public hearing.
Thank you. Can I get a motion in support? Councilmember Friedson moves. Is there a second?
Wait, excuse me, Council President, sorry. I have an amendment that I wanted to put through. I shared with colleagues. It's pretty straightforward. It was just a clarification to the way that the process was intended. MCEDC is on the line, as is Gene Smith. I'm not sure that it's necessary if there's agreement, but a amendment that I shared via email last night with colleagues, the executive branch, MCEDC, and council staff worked through. It would basically increase the previous $10,000 that was already received to up to $15,000, so that anybody, the 793 businesses, restaurants that already received this funding in the first allocation would not have to reapply. They could be eligible for $5,000 automatically, as long as they're still eligible through the state and county requirements. And then a new application process would open, and those applicants would be eligible for up to $10,000 that they received. In the off chance that there is additional funding, which I'm not expecting, but if there is additional funding, there's a process that MCEDC has set forth that would, as transparently and equitably and efficiently as possible, be able to ensure that all the funding that we are getting for this from the state is deployed to restaurants as quickly as possible. We know how desperately they need it. That has been a frequent discussion. So I would move the amendment as shared in writing, and hope for a second and that we could pass them.
Okay, that amendment's been moved. Councilmember Navarro seconds? Is that correct? Okay. Mr. Smith?
Sure. I don't have anything to add from what Mr. Friedson already shared. Thank you.
Okay. Any discussion of this amendment? Seeing none. Okay. All those in favor of the amendment, raise your hand, please. That is unanimous. And we need a vote on the final.
So moved.
Yes. Councilmember Friedson. Councilmember Rice seconds it. Friedson moves, Rice seconds. All those in favor. Councilmember Reamer, were you looking to speak? Okay. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Terrific. We're sending our restaurants a fraction of what we hope the state will continue to send. That's great. Thank you all. That closes the hearing on item 8. Item 8.5 is public hearing action, special appropriation of the FY21 operating budget, Office of the County Executive. Support for COVID-19 response in the amount of $6,232,666 for a hotel relief grant program. Action is scheduled for immediately following this hearing. Ms. Kennedy, do we have speakers for this hearing?
Yes, we do. We have one speaker, Kelly Groff.
Welcome, Ms. Groff.
Good afternoon, Council President, members of the County Council. I've also, in another role, been facilitating a COVID-19 pandemic recovery work group that was formed by the County Executive in June of 2020 that's comprised of representatives of hospitality, culture, recreation, and entertainment industry sectors. I want to first thank you all for your leadership through the pandemic and support of all the grant programs that have been offered to help businesses, but also residents. Today, I'm here to request support for the Hotel Grant Relief Program. This is the first grant program since the pandemic began for the industry sector. And although lodging facilities have been allowed to remain open, the properties that are open have experienced major employee layoffs and furloughs, and the management staff that remains on property are stretched beyond their capacity. From April to December of 2020, the hotel industry in Montgomery County has lost a total of $163 million in revenues. And the county has lost 1.12 million room nights. Occupancies have dropped from 78% to 28%. Average daily rate has dropped from $144 a night to $88 a night. The American Hotel Lodging Association just released its State of the Hotel Industry report. The forecast is for an average occupancy rate of 52.4 for all of 2021, leaving almost half of all rooms idle. In comparison, the pre-pandemic 2019 average occupancy rate was 66%. The continued sluggish market is largely due to the collapse in business travel, which started in April of 2020 and has continued through this new year. We do predict, though, that in late spring, we may begin to see slight improvement in business travel. This Hotel Grant Relief Program is much needed. We thank you in advance for your support.
Thank you very much. That wraps up the speakers for this public hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Groff. Powerful data. Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. That closes the hearing on item 8.5. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly acknowledge and thank Ms. Groff for all of the tremendous work that she has done. It's
Absolutely.
a really difficult job in these incredibly tough times, particularly for the industry that she is there to advocate for. And we're just really lucky to have you. I've been on a lot of late night and early morning calls working through some of these issues. Appreciate the collaboration with the executive branch as well on these issues. Certainly we need more help and more support, as the council president noted. We need the state and the federal government to step in to help us even further. But this is just like the restaurant relief, desperately needed by businesses that are desperately struggling, and really appreciate your efforts and your team's efforts working around the clock to be able to provide it. And I would move that we approve this.
Thank you. Thanks to you and Ms. Groff for your hard work on the recovery work group, and anybody else who's been involved. Very important work. We have a motion. We have a second now. Councilmember Reamer. All those in favor of this special appropriation, please raise your hand. Terrific. That's unanimous. That's unanimous. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you, Ms. Croft. We can move on to the district council session. Item A is a subdivision regulation amendment, exemption 2101, exemptions, alcohol, production, and agritourism. Lead sponsor is the council president at the request of the county executive. Any comments? Okay. Item B is public hearing on the Ashton Village sector plan is scheduled for March 2nd, 2021 at 1:30 p.m. Ms. Dunn or Dr. Orland, anything to say here?
Good afternoon. Nothing to say, although there is just a slight typo in the cover sheet of the staff report that notes the public hearing is on March 3rd, and it is actually March 2nd as the announcement on the council's agenda notes, and we'll make a correction to that cover sheet.
Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you. And now we're on to item C, the zoning text amendment 2001, solar collection system AR zone standards. The Fed and T&E committee recommends approval with amendments. Council member, let me call on the Fed committee chair to speak first.
Thank you. I will not make lengthy prefatory comments. I'm sure everyone will be happy about that, but we are going to walk through the packet. So the committee had made a number of non-controversial amendments from the stakeholder working group that tightened up various elements and made various improvements. So we will walk through those, I think, briefly in the packet, and hopefully they'll be accepted by the body. There are, two major outstanding issues that I know some council members would want to bring up. One is a restriction or a prohibition on the installation of these facilities on certain kind of soil. And then another is relating to the process for approval. And we can get to those in turn. We do have some experts here, planning staff and others to help with some of the details about those. I guess I had suggested earlier today that this would be a work session due to the extensive depth of these two topics, and thought it might be comfortable for people to be able to ask some questions and get more information before having to make a vote on those two larger amendments. That was my recommendation, and we'll see how we proceed, what the will of the body is here. The only prefatory comment I'd like to make, this has not been an easy dialogue, no question, and people feel very, very strongly about this, coming from so many different perspectives, and I really appreciate and salute all of the spirited engagement, and it shouldn't be surprising that trying to tackle something as difficult, as huge as the trajectory of our community in our world in climate change is difficult. It's going to be difficult. This is nothing compared to what it's going to be like in 10 or 20 years to grapple with the consequences of the problem as it gets worse, and to make changes, which the longer we wait to make changes, the more difficult they become. And I think that's the kind of underlying fundamental problem here. The longer the world waits, the longer the country waits, the longer our community waits, the more difficult it's going to be. Personally, I feel that really the decision that we have before us is whether we're willing to make the kinds of choices that need to be made in order to change the trajectory that we're on, to slow down and ultimately one day reverse the trends that are driving climate change. And fundamentally, the most important thing we can do is to shut down coal-fired power plants, and then secondarily gas-fired power plants. Those two things are of absolute crisis, urgent importance, and the way to shut those down is to substitute fuels that are clean and renewable, solar and wind. And in order to do that, we're going to have to make a lot of changes to generate the kind of solar that we need to shut down coal, to shut down gas. And the proposal that the committee is recommending would power as many as 50,000 homes in Montgomery County, which is quite a lot. It's a big share of the housing units in the county, and it would make a very, very meaningful dent. It would be by far the single most significant measure the council has adopted that I could find on record, and then some in terms of climate impact. But as a disruptive change, it's not easy, and there are many equities. The only comment I want to make about the issue of agriculture is that agriculture is possible in combination with these arrays. So I do not believe, I never have believed, that it's an either or between agriculture and solar. And we have seen now flourishing of business models that graze sheep beneath agriculture, between solar arrays. This region imports almost all of its lamb and mutton, and I have no doubt that under this proposal, a thriving grazing industry would immediately arise. That's just one example of how agriculture and solar can go together. But we can commence now. I know everyone will have plenty to say as we work our way through, so we'll go to we'll go back to, I know my co-chair wants to make a comment, and then again, we can walk through the packet. Tom.
Sure. Councilmember Joanna was taking our picture. Okay. A couple other council members, I thank you for all your work on this very important thing. We'll certainly never achieve our climate goals and the commitment we unanimously made to the emergency without measures like this. Councilmember Rice and asked to speak. Councilmember Rice.
Well, no,
I want to go before staff or
after? No. After staff. After staff.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you for clarifying that. Mr. Zions, thank you for all your hard work on this important bill. ZTA.
No, thank you. I think the sponsor has far more to do with it than I do, but I thank you nevertheless. The packet contains all of the changes that the committee made both before and after the hard work of the stakeholders group. The stakeholders that were appointed by Councilmember Katz and Councilmember Reamer agreed on some things and then split on many others. So that their work is included in the packet and referenced throughout the memo. The first things to go through all of the changes recommended by the committee, I just direct you to the first page of my memo for this item. It lists all of the changes with those changes recommended by a majority of the stakeholders groups represented in bold. And if you'd like, I go down through them and just see if there's comments. Is that okay with you? Yes? Okay. The first one is restricting solar to the Maryland's net metering program, including all COMAR references. That is the least controversial of what's going on, mainly because these things would not be able to proceed if they really didn't get into the net metering program, which allows users to feedback excess electricity back into the grid and get paid for that at the same rate that users are charged for that electricity. It's very advantageous to the solar industry on doing that, and would be uneconomic to do it otherwise. The other, I think, non-controversial, completely amendment by the Joint Committee was to allow 200% of on-site solar use. That is 200% of the needs of the property owner to proceed as a limited use without site plan approval or other approvals. Essentially, there are some conditions, so it's a limited use, but it's more than less for sure as of right. One of the controversial routines, I'm on number 3, if you're following along in the packet, one of the more routines was how to treat facilities larger than 2 megawatts. There's a court case that says that the county is preempted from actually regulating these types of facilities that are controlled by the Public Service Commission. But nevertheless, the Public Service Commission has to consider the local zoning and master plans when they make their recommendations. To that end, the committee's recommendation is basically to advise the state without controlling the state that we don't want these larger facilities in the agricultural reserve zone. So that is there as an amendment as well. There was concern for the environmental protections that these facilities, these larger facilities, more than 200% of on-site use would require. So the committee strengthened the environmental requirements for the location of these facilities. They would prohibit solar facilities in stream valleys and wetlands. They would prohibit solar facilities on slopes greater than 15%. They would specifically prohibit stripping topsoil from the site, although there was a provision that says grading on the site should be minimized. This is more specific to topsoil. The committee would expand the possible agricultural uses under the site to any plant use or other use for an agricultural purpose. There's a lot in your packet on some work that was done on allowing grazing underneath these panels, as Councilmember Reamer suggested. These things, there are agricultural uses under solar, and the least intensive being bee friendly, pollinator friendly plants, and that's also provided for. The committee wanted specific findings concerning forest conservation and tree protection, and they are included in the recommended revisions by the joint committee. There is within the site plan approval process, there's also a requirement for stormwater management. The committee wanted that also to be explicitly stated for the use of these larger solar projects. There's a requirement to minimize tree loss consistent with forest conservation, and if at all possible, subject to a planning board waiver to keep any tree felling in truly sensitive areas from happening. One of the things the committee also did was to limit the use of concrete in constructing these facilities and just limiting concrete to electrical and transformer pads, and basically the steel for supporting a solar facility would be pile driven into the ground and secured that way. That does two things. It increases the amount of land area available for planting and decreases the problems with ever turning the solar facility back into conventional agriculture. The committee required screening within 200 feet of a neighboring house with an opportunity for the planning board to waive some planting requirements, and that would be in pursuit of leaving the natural vegetation instead of having something constructed. It would delete a requirement for fencing, but it would not allow the approving authority to prohibit fencing. Fencing may be a requirement for ensuring these sites along the way. So there's a lot of thought that these would be fence sites, and they would have to work out something with the agricultural user to have access within that fence routine, fenced area. Number 14, we would the Joint Committee would prohibit land uses under solar. It would prohibit solar facilities on soil classification 1. That'll be a matter of controversy for the council to see if it wants to expand that, and there's more data on that if you wish. And then the last one is to just make the planning staff responsible for monitoring and to include the largest extent of area dedicated to this use, including any required setbacks and the acreage within the fenced or shrub area of the solar facility. So that is included as well. Aside from those things are the amendments proposed by council members, and I think I'll turn it over to them. Do you think? Yes, Councilmember Reamer, you think?
Yeah, I think that, at this point, the appropriate thing would be to turn to council members in turn. I know that Councilmember Rice has shared an amendment. Councilmember Glass has an amendment. I would certainly appreciate if Councilmember Glass could precede Councilmember Rice. I don't know if Councilmember Rice is open to that, but it's a phasing amendment that he may introduce. So, turn it back to the council president.
Could I make a recommendation? I mean, there were amendments that were referenced in the packet, and if we're going through the packet, it would seem to me that the appropriate protocol would be to take up the non-controversial Joint Committee recommendation first. We can vote on that, and then go through reference. If the president is willing, the referenced amendments in the packet. I know I had one, Councilmember Rice had one that are referenced in the packet, and then if there are any amendments from the floor, to me that would be the standard protocol, and so I would request as a point of clarification from the president. Thanks.
And to add to that, Councilmember Juwando had an amendment in the packet as well.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, I think we have to move the amended bill first.
Okay. So do we have to move the amended bill, Jeff, or is it already before us? I think it's already before us.
It's already before you because it's recommended by the Joint Committee.
Right.
So the amended bill is before us now, and we could proceed. I think proceeding through the packet would be a good structured.
Just as a point of clarification, I don't believe the Joint Committee actually voted the bill out again. I think the Joint Committee voted and came to consensus on the consensus amendments
I don't know about
specifically.
that.
And so we may want to just vote to approve the consensus amendments, but I'll yield to the chair and the council president on that.
The committee voted. The joint committee voted.
The joint committee voted previously on the bill to send to the full council. Then it went back to the joint committee to have the work group. The consensus work group amendments were voted out of the joint committee. The bill actually was not. Anyway, I'll yield to the chair and the president on how you want to handle
council
that.
staff, but my understanding is that we have the amended version before us. Jeff, is that right?
That is my opinion. What you did at your joint session was amend your prior recommendation, and I did not change the vote on the total bill, Councilmember Friedson, where you dissented from that.
Okay.
Okay.
So I was going to ask what the order from the packet, if we could go in order of as Councilmember Friedson suggested.
That seems very logical. Councilmember.
All right. But you're going to take this, if you will, if it's a straw vote today on accepting the joint committee recommendation subject to further amendment.
Sure. Does anybody want to move the joint committee?
Doesn't have to be moved.
Oh, yeah. It's already before us. Okay, thank you. I beg your pardon. Okay. All those in favor of the joint committee.
I'm sorry, point of clarification. I'm sorry, I'm confused because if there are going to be other amendments that are going to be considered, those amendments have to be considered. And then after we are able to address everything, then that's when we vote on the bill as amended. So I don't know why we're voting on a preliminary recommendation when we haven't entertained all the list of amendments.
Perhaps if it pleases the president, we could go through the order that it was presented in the packet of the referenced
additional amendments. Yeah, I agree, Councilmember Navarro. I thought the staff was suggesting that. So can we, where's the first amendment in the packet? Mr. Zions, can you refer us to a page number?
I'm looking for it right now. I really think I
think it's page 10, right?
Excuse me?
Is it page 10?
Might be page 8. No, it's not 8.
I think it's 10.
It's the one on soils comes up first.
Yeah.
Where the committee recommended prohibiting the use on soil classifications 1 only, and I believe there's an interest in making it 1 and 2.
That's correct. Am I being yielded now, Mr. President?
Yes, Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just be brief. I think we have talked extensively about the soil classifications. I don't think it requires a lot of lead-in. I think all council members are familiar with the various issues related to the soil classifications. Ultimately, the question was whether 1, 2, and 3 classifications would be excluded. The Joint Committee originally recommended Class 1 only. I've been consistent on this. I feel very strongly that Class 1 and 2 should be excluded. I think that's the appropriate path forward. It would still leave 33,154 acres available in total based on what is currently allowed. And so I would move an amendment to change the language to exclude Class 1 and Class 2 soil. Specifically, solar collection system is prohibited on soils classified by the United States Department of Agriculture as soil classification category 1 or 2.
Second.
Okay, Councilmember Friedson moves. Councilmember Katz seconds. Councilmember Reamer for discussion.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Chris McGovern from the Planning Department, who is with us, to walk us through what this means. This is a very, very significant change, and we've got some very detailed analysis of where the soils are and what consequences this has for the proposal.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Yes, so I'm Chris McGovern. I'm with the ITIGS group at the Planning Department. I'm going to share my screen. And share my screen share. Okay. So first of all, it's as you can see on the left, there's a million colors. All of the soils in the county have been mapped out to 96 different individual categories based on minerality and whatnot. However, what we're talking about are these soil capability classifications. And what that does is it groups up all of those 96 different soils into category 1, 2, 3, 4, and beyond. As you can see in this map here, the ag reserve is shown in blue. We have a predominantly category 2 in the ag reserve on the left and the right side predominantly. There is a little bit of class 1. It's on the islands of the Potomac mostly, and there are some other smaller pieces. But so anyway, we're talking about now the category 1, 2, and 3 land within the ag reserve. So the way we're doing this analysis is we start out with all of the ag reserve here in green on the left. It's got 106,000 acres. Now, in all the scenarios, there's a bunch of givens that all of the scenarios include, which we're removing the water, steep slopes, the agricultural easemented land, the parkland and whatnot, forests. And what that does is it gives you this blue. Out of the 106,000 acres, we're down to 33,000 acres in blue here that all of the three scenarios might partake in. In the right, I'm simply categorizing those 33,000 acres of what was blue in the middle now is categorized in 3 different colors for category 1 in green over here. Category 2 or classification 2 is the purple, which is the left and the right side. As you can see, category 2 is the largest portion of what's remaining, 18,000 acres. Class 3 is the other big one left in the ag reserve that's usable. So with this 33,000 acres categorized, we do the 3 scenarios. So we cut up all of those pieces of land by the parcels. And the idea is that you have to have 15 acres contiguous per parcel to be considered. And when you remove in scenario 1 on the left, category 1, 2, and 3, you're left with the category 4 and above. You have 10 parcels that have 15 plus at least 15 acres with which to qualify. So that would be 10 acres times 15, 150 potential acres. Scenario 2, if we remove category classification 1 and 2, now you're down to 110 parcels, or you're up to 110 parcels. That gives you a potential of only 1,650 acres, or on 110 possible parcels. And removing soil category 1 only gives you 377 parcels that would qualify to have at least that 15-acre chunk, which gives you a total potential of 5,600 acres.
Okay. I'd like to ask Leslie Elder for her analysis as well. She's with the solar sector.
How do I end?
Hello, thank you for allowing me to join and share some soil analysis. May I share my screen? Okay, can you see my screen okay?
No.
Not yet.
Okay, so taking the analysis that was just given, we took
Wait, Leslie, I'm sorry, we're not seeing your screen just yet.
Oh no.
And is Council IT staff able to grant Leslie Elder?
Feature is enabled.
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we took a similar approach to the analysis, but then we added in the layers that solar developers actually use to determine what a parcel would be that are viable. So if you look at the acres that are available within the ag reserve, you remove all of the classifications that you guys are talking about right now, and specifically looking at excluding class 2. And you then go and you look at very specific items that are needed in order for facilities to come online, including interconnection, which needs to be 0.4 miles from the electric lines, and then also farmer interest into building the facilities, which is about 1 in 20 farmer landowners are interested in hosting a solar facility on their land. The elimination of class 2 soil facilities will take it down to 34 parcels, which then will actually only do 4 megawatts of community solar or ag-nem facilities in the ag reserve, essentially making the ZTA non-existent. So 4 megawatts.
I'm not hearing you, Leslie. We might have just. Okay, so I don't know if Leslie's still with us, but her screen is, which is helpful. Leslie, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, so I just wanted to ask you a question. So can you go back to that screen?
I sure can.
Okay, so you take the entire ag reserve and it filters down to 41 parcels, am I correct?
Yep.
That would be practical or possible.
That's correct.
Due to distance from the lines and the soil. And then your experience in other markets is that about 1 in 20 property owners actually want to do it.
Yep.
And therefore, that's how you end up with a expectation that there would be 2 parcels of community solar implementation.
Yep. Which equates to 4 megawatts.
Which is 4 megawatts. So, okay. So I think it's clear at least why I think this proposal is untenable, and we can turn it back to the floor for discussion on this item.
Right, Councilmember Alvarez.
Thanks. Sorry, there's a lot going on my screen here. Can you guys see? Okay, there we go.
Yeah, all of ours.
Okay, I'm going to start kind of from 30,000 feet just to provide some context, because there's no perfect way of doing this because it's complicated and there are a variety of different issues. But I want to get out my general thoughts for context as we go through the entire packet. So apologies for potentially the length of my comments right now. This, without a doubt, has been one of the most challenging issues that has come across my desk in the 2 years that I've been on the council. People whom I greatly respect, both in the solar world and in the conservation and looking for alternative energy sources world, have brought extensive research. I've been given 10 books on both sides. I've been given literally dozens of articles on both sides. And I've lost track of how many meetings I've had with really unbelievably impressive and much smarter than me people on both sides. And I have greatly appreciated the passion and energy that folks have brought to bear, because you've got 2 critically important issues that we're trying to address moving forward. And I've also greatly respected the many conversations I've had with advocates within the agricultural reserve, acknowledging that our ag reserve is frankly a treasure that was bestowed upon us by previous policymakers that had the vision to carve out a very important component, both economically but also socially, for our residents, something we've all benefited from and will continue to benefit from for generations. And quite understandably, the advocates and people that reside within the agricultural reserve are concerned about infringing upon the core mission of why it was established in the first place, And I can certainly understand the concern that this potentially cracks open the door, to an issue that could go beyond. And I also know this isn't the last time the agricultural reserve is going to be under pressure. It has been in the past, but there will be a fight in the not too distant future about widening of our bridges. We're going to have an existential threat at some point in my lifetime, probably much later, with regards to housing. So there's going to continue to be pressure on the agricultural reserve for generations to come. And then, of course, on the flip side, you've got the existential threat of climate change and the urgency to want to address it and attack it as best we can. And with every tool that we have in our toolbox, starting at the local level and then, of course, at the national and international level as well. And so I appreciated the passionate comments of the chair of the Fed committee in sort of setting up this next evolution of this discussion. And I think it's pretty safe to say everyone I've spoken to does want to find some sweet spot here, some compromise in which we can allow both these critically important functions to be able to move forward, and if possible, congruently and in harmony. But after the series of work sessions that we have had and the very thoughtful approach that both chairs have gone about this, and I appreciate Councilmember Katz, who I know has also been intimately involved and with his team on helping to find those sweet spots, those compromises. And the great news is, I'm confident this bill is going to pass. We are going to be able to move forward here. We are going to make significant progress, in my opinion, from where we first started. And so I commend everybody that has worked so tirelessly on this, including our Council Central staff. But I keep coming back to the fact that the agricultural is this treasure, and we want to protect it as best we can, and certainly within reason. And so on the soil issue, I get that adding the second layer of soils, and I almost wish, and I said this to the advocates, I wish there was like a 1.5 soil, but there isn't. There's a class 1 and there's a class 2. And I understand that that will restrict where exactly we may be able to provide, some of the solar capacity. But I think in the interest of trying to protect this treasure, trying to protect its initial mission, which is still incredibly important relative to the needs that we have now and into the future, I support Councilmember Friesen's amendment of the class 1 and class 2. Because while I do understand that it will significantly, restrict where we can put solar, it doesn't mean we can't put solar within the agricultural reserve. And it also gives us an opportunity to learn from this and I know there's another amendment to phase this in within policy, but this is another way of us being able to assess and evaluate exactly what the impacts of this technology will be as it relates to the agricultural reserve. And not just any agricultural reserve, our agricultural reserve. So I support this amendment. That's way more background and context that I'm sure everyone needs. But I just wanted to share with you some of my thoughts and some of my reasoning for supporting it. Thank you. I yield back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Council Member. Council Member Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I really do appreciate the thoughtful comments by Vice President Albornoz. These are all difficult issues to reconcile, very data-driven. I'm not sure how many work sessions we had as a joint committee, 2, 3, 4, if you include maybe the last one where nothing was really voted on per se. And we looked at the granular level here, no pun intended. That's what we're talking about. And with regard to the soil amendment, I absolutely understand the goal decades ago of the Ag Reserve and absolutely support it. Absolutely 100% support it. And one of the safeguards in the ZTA as proposed was that it limited it to 2% of the Ag Reserve. And I take that as a safeguard. because that means 98% is still going to be unchanged. And even the 2%, if it gets built out, and all of us, we deal with land use issues all the time, and we know that what is allowed for hardly ever gets built out. And so as it was written, 2% being built out would allow for us to start moving towards our climate goals, because we are in a climate emergency, and those goals are what motivate me, because if we continue to allow the planet to burn at records never seen in human existence, this year last year tied for the hottest year in history, recorded history. That's the emergency we're dealing with, and there won't be an ag reserve. There won't be a council to help mitigate that. And so for this amendment, I don't support the amendment to expand to soil 2, because the simple reason is that reduces the already small area by 70%. We've already limited in the ZTA to 2% of the ag reserve. And as was just shown on the maps, the soil amount from 1,650 potential acres to 5,600 potential acres to 1,600 potential acres is more than 70% reduction. And so at that point, we will continue reducing the footprint so that it's just not feasible, and we don't even make a dent in whatever might come to help mitigate our climate change. I yield back.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also want to take a little moment, since I have not spoken publicly, I guess. I've met with many different groups, but haven't shared this publicly. I do want to thank the Joint Committee and the leadership for working so hard on this particular proposal. I can't help but remember early on in my when I joined the council, one of the first opportunities I had was to have lunch with Mr. Roy Hansen, who's very stern in terms of the duty and responsibility that council members had in preserving and protecting this extraordinary asset, which is our agricultural reserve. And I very much appreciated that advice, and didn't realize how quickly I would be faced with these particular kinds of decisions. As it was stated earlier, many proposals to develop the agricultural reserve, to incur into the agricultural reserve. And it's never been an easy thing, because there are so many competing policy decisions that we have been entrusted to make on behalf of our residents. And so this one in particular is interesting, because there is no doubt that climate change is an extraordinary challenge that we are facing. And so it is very, it's been very hard to parse out, how do we stay true to protecting what is an extraordinary resource for Montgomery County, and how do we continue to work on different ways to mitigate and really try to arrest in some way this very important existential crisis. And I have shared this before with some of the constituents that have come to, that I've met with, that my father died in 2015, and for I think the better of 10 years before that, he had shared with me many times how he had planned out moving to the Andes region of Venezuela and the border with Colombia, which is a very fertile land. And he planned to basically grow his own, food. And he would say to me, how important food sustainability was, because you never knew what challenges may come across. Of course, I'm sure many of you have heard about Venezuela and the challenges there, and realize that there are lots of issues. Food security is one of them. And I remember so starkly when, right after the declaration of emergency, national emergency here in our United States of America, the first time I actually put on a mask and gloves and decided to go grocery shopping for my family was probably April 2020, and saw the empty shelves. And it really, for me, was a visual that gave me gave me so much anxiety in the sense that I never thought I would see that here in the United States. And it began for me, I think, this thought process of how we have up until now been very complacent and felt so secure in many different ways that perhaps we have now learned we should have never been. And so as I've thought about this particular ZTA and the importance of doing something with regards to solar as one of the components for us to address climate change, I also became very much focused on the fact that, you know what, we do have this extraordinary resource that we could utilize if needed in different ways for additional food production. Because when we see the lines of our residents of all socioeconomic backgrounds trying to get food assistance and trying to get that box of food here in the United States of America, you know, I became much more mindful of the fact that our agricultural reserve can play a real pivotal role in many different ways. We could pivot in different ways that we are using it now just to address something that now has become real, which is the real possibility of major food shortages. And so again, it's not something that is right in front of us, but it is there in the back of my mind because I experienced it just like many of you did when we saw those empty shelves. And so I want to be able to do something, and I want to be able to balance these two competing very important needs, which is just a way to say that I am supportive of this particular amendment. Because I think that we can begin and see how this goes. Yes, I've read all the different research on both sides, and I have appreciated everybody who has, you know, sent over information, has tagged me on Twitter, has sent me articles, etc., and I've read them all. And at the end of the day, I feel like there are other opportunities that we also have to explore. And although I'm not closing the door completely on this particular proposal, I will be supporting these amendments because I think it strikes a balance for the competing needs that we have on behalf of our residents. So that's a way to say that I do support Councilmember Feetsen's amendment.
Thank you. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I too am supporting this amendment. And I want to start out and thank the Joint Committee, because the Joint Committee has gone through a lot from the very beginning. And of course, I want to thank the work group. And it was because of the Joint Committee and because of this council that the work group is even brought to fruition. It was, I raised it last year when I was council president, but without the help, the collaboration of this council, it wouldn't have come to be. And the work group had to, it really did have to work. I mean, it was people from both sides. There were four co-chairs, I guess would be the way to say it. Two from the industry, two from the ag world, and not that they agreed on every topic, and not that I thought that they would, but they certainly worked hard to come to agreement as best they could. And when Dr. Hansen and Councilmember Navarro mentioned it, but when Dr. Hansen was here just a few weeks ago, and I was gonna use the term that he suggested that we not have solar in the ag reserve, but anybody that knows Dr. Hansen knows that he does more than suggest. He made a definite statement, and that we shouldn't do it. But I don't agree with that part of it. I believe that there's a possibility for commercial solar in the ag reserve. And I believe we have to be careful how we do it. We had to be careful, not that this council did it, but 40 years ago, a council came up with a solution on how to have an ag reserve. It wasn't always applauded by the ag community when it happened, but it happened. And 40 years later, we're all very proud of it. And I believe that there's a possibility, because I want it all. I want commercial solar there, and I want the ag reserve to continue to prosper. And I believe that there's the way that we can do this. And you know, the industry and others are saying, well, if you do it this one or another amendments as well, it's a poison pill. This isn't a poison pill. This is not. Years ago, when I was on a planning commission in Gaithersburg, and you had developers come in and say, if you do it this way, we will never be here, and we will forever, you know, never come back, and yada yada. And then 2 weeks later, a month later, they realized that this is a possibility. It's not what they wanted in the beginning, but they came back with a way to do things. And that's what this has to be done. If we can pass this zoning text amendment with the right way and do it in the right way, we can have it all. And that's what this is all about. We want solar and we want ag, and we can get it both. So thank you very much, and I support the amendment.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
You're muted, Councilmember Rice.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you to the supporters and advocates. Thank you to the Joint Committee. I'm going to just be very brief and just read something that our Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments said that really frames why it is that we continue to be concerned. The Washington region has a growing demand for food, yet land and farms has been steadily decreasing since World War II. Earlier in this decade, COG set a regional goal to maintain 498,946 acres. I'm going to read that again, to maintain 498,946 acres of land and farms to improve the food system and preserve agriculture. The most recent data just puts us just about 3,000 above that threshold, and that is as a region. Every single acre goes counter to our objectives to just at least maintain the level of agricultural production we have in this region. And we know this is similar not only in our region, but also across this country and across this world. And so it is imperative for us to do both. As Councilmember Katz said, we have to do both. We have to be very intentional about our climate change goals and what it is that we're looking to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to increase our reliance upon renewable energy sources. It's the reason why I signed on as a co-sponsor to this bill. I firmly believe in what it is that we are trying to do here, but we have to balance both of them together. And I feel with this amendment and the one that will be presented and another one that I hear will be presented as well, will really help to get us to that direction. And so from that perspective, I'll be supporting this amendment. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other requests. We have an amendment before us moved by Councilmember.
I had requested.
Oh, beg your pardon, Councilmember Remix. Sure.
Well, I don't know what to say exactly. We've seen the analysis. You know, keep in mind that this is not like a housing development where people say they can't make enough profit. And you know, it's a question of whether they can figure out how to you know, work the numbers. This is a prohibition on where they can actually place the installations. And you know, we've just seen from the mapping that this proposal takes the 1,800 acres down to, at a maximum, 40 sites. And based on typical, so 40 sites, first of all, is a, you know, massive reduction of the amount of solar that this proposal would achieve. And then, of course, based on, you know, the real world experience of the solar industry and markets all around, it's not 100% of the property owners that have an interest in doing this. It's 1 in 20. And so you'll end up with 2 solar projects totaling 4 megawatts of power, which is about the amount, I think, a little bit more than on the roof of the council office building. So that's how we take a proposal that seeks to power 50,000 homes down to the amount that you fit on top of an office building. It's, frankly, it's a devastating proposal. And if it's combined with additional restrictions, I don't know that the additional restrictions matter anymore, because there's nothing left. I hate to say it that way, but this is not something, I don't believe that there's any way around. This is a prohibition. This is not a, this is not a figure out how to work through it, as far as I can tell. So that's why it's described as a poison pill. You're not allowed to build on the soil. So it doesn't sound like the council is, the will of the council is there to reject this amendment, but that's really unfortunate.
Okay, Councilmember Rice.
Just very quickly. It's troubling when we take numbers from folks and assume that that's the fact. There is no fact as to how many they'll be successful. You're using a number that the industry has presented you in terms of their success rate. I have no idea. Those numbers haven't been vetted by anyone. That's just the testimony. It's not to say that it's not true, but it's not to say that it will hold true here. It may hold true differently because of what we're asking for, and because there's been so much collaboration and conversation. Maybe this is a more successful event. I will just remind folks, I remember when we were talking about Costco coming to Wheaton, and the industry said they would never be able to come unless we did X, Y, and Z and jump through so many hoops. And Costco and Wheaton seems to be doing pretty well. So again, let's just, instead of pitching failure before, we've even left the gate, what I think that we need to do is make sure that we continue to provide the support that's necessary for everyone. You've heard from folks who say that they do not want solar. And so we'll need to try and figure out ways to continue to promote and work with them within the framework that I think that we're setting forth that allows for both things to move forward. But to continue to put out language and statements that have not been validated, I don't think is the right thing for us to do, nor is it productive in terms of the overall efficacy that we seek to have, which is to make sure that folks are looking at this as an option, looking at it as a way to, be in an ancillary to the other things that they're already doing in the agricultural reserve, and combine those two aspects. That is a possibility. It is possible to work together. It is not a fait accompli. I heard the same poison pill description for every single amendment, and so it's like, let's try and look at the positive in this that I think Councilmember Albornoz said, which was, look, we want to see something move forward. We want to see this industry succeed at the same time as we don't want to put any stumbling blocks in front of our agricultural industry as well. And so from that perspective, I feel as though by doing these things today, we strike the right balance, and we can then start encouraging people within that to go ahead and move forward. And so I think that's what our message should be.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thanks. I understand your disappointment and the passion from which you're coming from, Councilmember Reamer, but talking about devastation over something, we're not taking something away that already exists within the agricultural reserve. We're talking about adding a component that over time, as people adjust and as people reflect and as people look at, could possibly be built on. And I suspect it probably will be. But I think to characterize it that way, not even this all the way through this discussion is disappointing to me. And I think, you talked to, I don't appreciate that characterization because I think that we are trying to move forward here. And while, again, I respect and appreciate that disappointment, I don't share the sentiment in the same way that you do clearly. I get where it's coming from, but I don't think it's helpful or productive to frame things in that way either.
Okay, I don't see any other requests. We have a motion on the table for this amendment from Councilmember Friedson, seconded by Councilmember Katz. All those in favor of the amendment? That is Councilmember Friedson, Councilmember Katz, Councilmember Albornoz, Councilmember Rice, Councilmember Novato. Did I get everybody? All those opposed? Councilmember Glass, Councilmember Reamer, Councilmember Jawando, Council President Hucker. Okay, great. That amendment is disposed of. Thank you all.
That one, technically in writing, is an easy amendment. It's only a few words addition to the already prohibition to class 1 soils. Now the next amendment suggested is on page 10 of the memo, of my memo, really dealing with whether this approval should be a conditional use. And I overstepped what Councilmember Wright was actually proposing and what you had in your packet, where as drafted, it was a proposal to add conditional use to a site plan approval process. But as I understand it, Councilmember Rice would propose that these uses that are over 200% of on-site use be approved by conditional use and not by site plan, which is more typically the way the zoning ordinance arrives at proposals. There are very few land uses that have both of those requirements, because once you have both of them, you have the jurisdiction of the hearing examiner and the Board of Appeals, and the hearing examiner and the planning board. That can be a problem. So he would propose taking all of the conditions that were in on site plan approval and making those conditions of conditional use approval. Technically, it's easy to explain that way. It's we'll take some redrafting to do this one. There are differences, of course, in jurisdiction right away between conditional use and site plan approval. With conditional use, I put in all of the findings that are required in the memo that you have before you. Significant to me is a couple of them that make it somewhat discretionary or more discretionary to approve or disapprove in total a proposal in conditional use as opposed to site plan. Even there's a straight up provision that says even if you meet all of the standards for a conditional use approval, it should not imply that it automatically means that you're compatible. It's still a separate finding required by the hearing examiner. There's no such negative presumption in site plan, although the site plan also has to make a compatibility finding essentially and a master plan conformance finding. I think that's all of what we say. If you want to talk to the hearing examiner, she's available on this call. If I've misstated anything from Council Rice's proposal, he's here to correct me as he has done in the past. So I'll leave my statements there.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff, and Mr. President, if I may, with the amendment, just frame this. Look, the idea of having a conditional use incorporated with the site plan is going to mean reduced time and reduced expense, and can oftentimes expedite the appeal process as well. It also gives us an opportunity to layer in a component dealing with racial equity and social justice, something that all of us are very concerned about, and want to make sure that if a project does move forward, that it does have the ability to be able to encourage folks to consider opportunities for folks in our people of color community, whether it's immigrants or people who are from here interested in farming. I have talked many times about our immigrant community. One of my good friends, Joseph, who owns the African Market in Gaithersburg, who has consistently been trying to break into getting into the farming aspect to make sure that he can bring some of his native practices from Africa here to the United States and grow that food that he sells at his African market. But when it comes to conditional use, I feel that conditional use is a really good compromise. I will just state a fact: out of the last 80 proposed projects, only one of them was not approved. That one that was not approved was the one that I referenced, which was the Costco gas station. And that project, the Costco, still moved forward. I see the hearing examiner laughing because it's just the facts are the facts, right? The conditional use process would also give projects a legal path forward that could not be challenged. And there's no reason why we can't have a robust clean energy expansion and protect our precious and limited agricultural and open space assets. And I feel as though this does this. We don't have to look far to see other communities who do the same thing and have the same process. Both Howard and Baltimore counties require conditional use approval for commercial solar, and they have several projects that are pending right now. I actually just talked to Johnny Olszewski, who's the Baltimore County executive, and he talked to his staff and got back to me and let me know he feels the process works incredibly smooth and that the industry is very interested in continuing to do more in Baltimore County. And so from that perspective, I really feel as though this is a great way to move forward. I will just say that this version, as you received last night at 7:04, so I apologize for the lateness of it. I get mad when I get those late at night, so please direct that anger towards me and not to the amendment. But it removes the site plan approval, as Jeff said, and instead the previous findings are moved to those conditional use standards. And you know, again, it's really about making sure that we also include some sort of language that incorporates the commitment to racial equity and social justice. I know that Councilmember Navarro and I have had a chance to talk about it. It's the reason why we wanted to try and put this forward as 2 district council members representing the Agricultural Reserve. I can't tell you how important it is for us to continue to see this meld together, to see a process that is fair and equitable to everyone involved. Like I said before, 80 projects, only one not approved. It also gives us an opportunity to make sure that the community weighs in. I know that Mr. Lecklider, who's on the call, Mr. Scheffel, Mr. Chris, and others have all chimed in and said they believe this is the right step for us moving forward and truly means a great compromise position. And so therefore, I'd like to move at this point that conditional use standard.
Second. Can I just be clear that also one of the things I didn't mention is that you wanted to make an appeal directly to the district court instead of the Board of Appeals, and I don't have any text on exactly what you're proposing with racial equity. I thought that was going to be a separate program offered, not in the zoning ordinance itself.
Right. It can't be actually in the zoning text itself, but it's an understanding and certainly something with which I know that we have our Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. I'd really like to have Councilmember Navarro, because she and I talked about this at length, and she has some ideas about working with Tiffany Ward and others to create, and working with our Office of Agriculture to come up with that kind of language that we'll need to move forward in cohort with this to make sure that it addresses the concerns that the greater community has. And I want to applaud our agricultural community for really being passionate about this as well. I know Mr. Scheffel spoke about this in one of our conference calls, and to see folks who really understand and embrace this ideology and how we need to do a better job and can in these instances of giving this land that is underneath these solar panels and making sure that we're providing those opportunities to people of color in our community is just tremendous. So I give them accolades for that as well. So thank you, Jeff. You are correct.
Councilmember Bramer.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Leslie Elder to just talk a little bit about some of the complications of this from the perspective of the solar sector. I think in light of the soils amendment, I don't know exactly what to say. The analogy to Costco is apt if, in a sense, if it would actually be legal for Costco to come into Wheaton. I think what we've done with the soils amendment is say that it doesn't matter if there's a special exception because you're not allowed to go there in the first place. You can't go there. Like, you're still prohibited from applying for conditional use on the soil. Like, the fact that it's a conditional use doesn't mean you can apply for soil to use soil that you are prohibited from using. I think that's the challenge here, but that's half the challenge. That's the big picture. But if I could ask Leslie to just talk, because I think the other issue is that this is a little different than other kinds of projects that go through conditional use in that it's incredibly expensive before you ever file a conditional use application. And I think that's the core difference that I'd at least like for my colleagues to get a chance to hear about.
Excellent. I'm going to share my screen again, if that's at all possible.
Very briefly.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a couple of different processes that you have to go through and before you even get to the permitting process at the county level. So the developer will secure a site, which kind of looks like this, prior to even implementing or going into the state program. Once you go into the state program, and that is the securing the site also requires signing a contract with the landowner and then paying money up front for that. Then you apply for the state program. And then as you can see, there's a time frame associated with all of this. There's also a fair amount of money that is put up, which can be anywhere from $250,000 to $1 million before you make it out of this element right here. And the time on this is incredibly important because there is a time limit that is mandated by the state to ensure that you get to the completion of the program or completion of the project by 730 days. So if you follow this timeline, it's really important. So that can take anywhere from 200 to 260 days, depending on the process at the PSC level. Then you enter into the county level, and then you start also incurring more price points associated with that. The changes that have been proposed are happening right here. So at this moment in time, if everything is at the lower end of the process, meaning there are no delays associated with permitting at all, and there's assurances that the permitting will happen, there's only 35 days for a developer to be able to finish their project and have the certainty to get that online before they start incurring fees after they've already invested $250,000 to $1 million. And all of that is up front before any of the money is coming back to the developer itself. And once you start changing those things and you're adding time onto that based off of conditional use, then you're going to incur a delay and you will be fined by the state by $50,000 per megawatt. But the thing that's even more frightening is that you only get a 365 extension on that. And if you go beyond that, then you will be kicked out of the program, which means you will lose that entire investment, which can be anywhere from $1 million to $4 million, depending on the project itself, which means that developers will decide whether they can even take that risk. And based off of our calculation, conditional use can add anywhere between 180 to 360 days onto the process itself, plus incur additional legal fees with very little certainty that the project can come online.
Okay, thank you for that. I think the main issue to my mind is the risk, and if there was certainty or great certainty that at the end of that process you were going to get approved, I think people would take the risk. I think the issue is under conditional use, you can be denied based on compatibility. And as a result, it's really a toss-up as to whether you're going to ultimately get approved. And therefore, are you really going to take the risk, put that money up front, when you might not be able to get it approved in the end, when you could focus your effort elsewhere and, you know, work in Pennsylvania or work in some other community that doesn't have that problem. So I am very concerned that as a result of this, you know, it just will not, it'll restrict, if not eliminate, the certainly restrict the likelihood that we'll get any projects.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Joando.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I appreciate all the dialogue with my colleagues to this point. Just wanted to offer some, as others have done, offer some just general comments. I had the pleasure of being on the joint committee where we considered this over many hours and had all those side meetings and lobbying calls. And, you know, I felt important throughout this process, as I'm sure all of our colleagues did, as we got all the calls from all the many people on different sides. It just underscores the importance of the issue and the passion and the dedication of folks who care about our environment and care about the food sustainability and care about our ag reserve. And I think Councilmember Katz said it well. We want both. We want all of these things, and we need them. We need food to be sustainable. We need to transition from dirty energy. So I think it's a testament to the importance of the issue. And I want to thank everyone who's reached out to all of us and to me in my office in particular. You know, I had been pushing in committee. I think colleagues will remember, we had an extensive soils discussion in committee, in the joint committee. And I had been really recommending and trying to find a sweet spot, to use one of my other colleagues, Councilmember Albanaz's language, in finding even a distinction between Class 2 soils. We went in depth in committee, and then I went offline with the planning department, and Seamus McNamara and my staff tried to find, can we distinguish, because there are distinguishable factors in types of Class 2 soil, but we don't have yet the tools, is where we ended up to, at this point, to be able to distinguish properly between those soils. So we had to back off of that pursuit, but we pursued it for weeks. And I was hoping it could be a way to allow enough solar production to take place to have a demonstrable impact, but also protecting the very important mission of the Ag Reserve as it relates to agriculture and food production and the like. I voted against the soils amendment because at the end of the day, I do think it was too limiting in the sense that there's not enough land. I do think there is still some land and projects will go forward, but it was a tough call for me. And I just wanted to explain that since I didn't speak to it last time. On this issue, I feel differently. I think hearing from the hearing examiner, hearing from the advocates, the concerns about wanting to have a fair hearing on both sides and an impartial decision made that's final about a project moving forward. The fact that most uses are approved and the process takes 4 to 6 months on average. And again, the data given from the hearing examiner, I think on balance, and you know, as a lawyer, this weighed on me heavily. I think due process is important. The opportunity to present evidence and to be heard and to appeal. And I really appreciate Councilmember Rice and Navarro changing it so that you can go directly to the district court, which if you need to get there more quickly under the timelines, that's an important factor. And so I will be supporting the conditional use process amendment as I think it is the right process at this time. After we dispose of this amendment, I'll be offering an amendment related to an impact study that I think will allow us to take a look back, or future councils to take a look back and see, were we too restrictive? Do we need to open up more? What do we need to do to achieve our goals? And I think that's the appropriate way to proceed here, considering the importance of what's at stake and what we're trying to balance. So I wanted to offer that. I appreciate the amendment, and I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, any other, Councilmember Reamer?
Thanks. I have a friendly amendment to this amendment, what I consider to be a friendly amendment. I'm looking at Mr. Lecklider. He's smiling. I don't know. Probably the first time he smiled at me in a long time. In any event, I'm teasing you, Doug. Appreciate everything you've been doing. So one of the issues which I kind of alluded to is the risk of a project denial. And, I think that's really more of the concern here. I think Councilmember Rice has designed an approach that probably resolves most of the issues as far as the length of time. But, there still is the question. I mean, fundamentally, it can be appealed to court on a pretty wide set of concerns. So I wanted to at least address one of those risk factors and, try to minimize that risk as best we can. And that's basically the question of visual impact. I have never heard really from the ag community that visual impact was their concern. Their concern, I think, fundamentally is the disruption of the farm economy in many different ways. But it's not really about how things look. And I think if we could constrain the review and say that visual impact will not be a considering factor, I think that would minimize the risk of the process and ensure that the review is focused on other compatibility factors having to do fundamentally more with agriculture and other types of concerns. So I actually did just email this around. The language would be that the hearing examiner may not consider the visual impact of a solar collection system in determining whether the use is harmonious with the surrounding community or whether the use will alter the character of the surrounding community. One stipulation to that, there are certain historic properties in the ag reserve. Those projects, any project there would have to go through a separate historic review. And according to Jeff Science, it's not something that we would need to be concerned about. The historic process takes care of itself. So in any event, I view this as a friendly amendment. I hope the sponsor does too, but in any event, it's an amendment to just narrow this just a bit and ensure that the review is focused on things that hopefully we all agree are more appropriate conditions for approval or denial.
Councilmember Rice.
I'm reading it, so I apologize. If you could give me a second, Mr. President. I know that we actually heard something about the hearing examiner process, and we have the hearing examiner on.
Sure.
So I'd like to give her an opportunity to respond to what she heard industry folks say about what her process is. So I'd love to hear directly from her.
Thank you. Good morning. Lynn Hammond. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I think just for the council's benefit, you deal with rezonings, but you don't deal with conditional uses directly. So let me just go through the process and maybe it'll eliminate some of these questions. And I also have a suggestion for the time frame that I think it was Ms. Elder put up. But in any event, what happens is a special exception gets filed with the planning department. Once they review for completeness, it technically comes to OZA. That's the Office of Zoning and Administrative Hearings. It technically comes to us, but it doesn't really come to us because once it gets filed, a process starts where it's under the review by the planning department. And while we're supposed to schedule a hearing within 120 days, many cases are postponed by the applicant because to work out technical issues with staff. So About 70% of our process is planning staff review. And the balance of our process is the hearing examiner and us having a hearing and writing a decision. I did read some of the information. I have to tell you that the application requirements between a site plan and a conditional use are not that different. I was a little surprised to see that. And on page 10 of Jeff's memo, it lists this long thing of approval requirements. Well, several of those requirements are not applicable to conditional uses in the AR zone. I do think, and the planning board must make a decision on compatibility, and many of their findings are the same findings that OZA makes. I think the real discomfort that people are having is that I keep seeing this word subjective. Hearing examiners can't be subjective. We can't just say, oh, we don't like, put double the setback, or, turn out the lights, or put some trees here. We can't do that. And in the conditional use process, 99% of the conditions we impose are recommended by staff of the planning department or the county council. Sometimes we change things if something happens at a public hearing, or sometimes people don't like the conditions recommended by the planning board. But I keep hearing this, and I will say this too, site plans are subject to conditions by the planning board as well. Now, so both of them can have conditions, separate conditions opposed. I think, and it's not this subjective as Mr. Rice said, 90, I don't know the percentages, but 90% of our applications are, at least 90% are approved. I'll also say that just craft a conditional use process. Oh, you
just go back a sentence and start over. Yeah.
Okay, you can craft a conditional use process you can, just like the appeal to directly to the circuit court, you can craft a conditional use process that meets the needs of this. To Ms. Elder's point, you can create, if there is a timeline involved, you can add a timeline. That's what we have to do in telecommunications cases. We have to have a timeline. In telecommunications cases, it goes through planning staff, but not the planning board, because we have to meet the 150-day shot clock. So sometimes you can do things to create, I guess I'll call it a fast track, but I do want to point out that the 6.2 months is based, for instance, some of the review times at the planning department have been over a year. And that is not something that OZA has control over. So one thing that you could do is put some kind of fast track timeline. And I really think the other point is, I think the biggest difference between the site plan process and the conditional use process is the conditional use process has a criteria for approval that the site plan process does not have. And that criteria, to phrase it simply, is there something unusual at this particular location, either of the use at this particular location? So you look at physical characteristics of, is there a physical characteristic of the site that's weird or creates problems? Or is there an operational characteristic of the site? Do they want too much on this property? That is a recommendation that is first made by planning staff, reviewed by the planning board. And I can't tell you it's subjective because there's a whole formula developed on how we analyze it. It's out there in all our reports. And so what the condition, I think the biggest difference between the conditional use process and the site plan process is it captures those weird situations where something is not something is atypical. And as Mr. writes, and if you want that, you should go with a conditional, you would have to go with a conditional use. If you don't want that criteria of approval, it's up to you. So that, I see that as the critical difference. I did want to say there is some fast tracking you could do if you wish. We do it with telecommunication towers. It's I say that, but planning staff would probably, that would impact planning staff probably more than it does with OZA. But if there's any questions about the conditional use process, I'd be happy to answer them. As I said, the council doesn't deal with it on a day-to-day basis. Yes, Mr. Reamer, I see it. Oh, Mr. Tucker's has to recognize it.
Exactly.
We're out of control, Lynn. Thank you for this very, very helpful information. Are you commenting on something that Ms. Hand just said, Mr. Reamer?
Well,
I didn't see your hand.
Yes, sort of. I mean, first of all, I wanted to ask how we might craft a more streamlined process or whether you think the proposal achieves that. But prior to that, we also have my suggested friendly amendment.
Well, I don't know which is more streamlined, frankly. I don't have any information on site plans.
Okay. Well, I think it kind of underscores what I was saying was I'm not sure. Well, let me ask, can I ask what do you think would be the implication of a amendment that says visual impact is not a factor?
That would be hard I haven't been involved till Saturday in the discussion. So I'm not well versed with the substantive discussions you've had. That's something that's entirely up to you. If it's not a factor, we won't consider it. If that's what everybody's objecting to.
I mean, some people will object to it. Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, some people will object to these installations for their visual impact. You would consider that, according to council staff, you would consider that in your decision. Therefore, I'm suggesting.
I thought that was dealt with in the screening. I'm looking through Jeff's memo quickly.
Can we ask Jeff for his comment here?
Well, what I would say is under the conditional use process, you have to look at both the inherent and non-inherent aspects of the proposal. An inherent aspect of a solar facility of 10 acres is it looks like a solar facility of 10 acres. So this would take that visual effect out if the concern is for how it impacts agricultural uses around.
Jeff, we lost you.
Oh, did you finish the sentence?
I thought I did finish the sentence. I thought it ended at the sentence.
Maybe.
All right. Say it again. Your last sentence, I think more than one of us missed it.
Oh, okay. Just to say that again, the hearing examiner has to look at inherent and non-inherent effects of a land use. The inherent effects are, what is it? You know, if it's a gas station, it looks and smells like a gas station. That's inherent in the use. The non-inherent effects are how it is different at a particular site. So what Mr. Reamer is suggesting here is to prohibit looking at the visual effects for the sake of determining whether it's harmonious with the local area or incongruous with the character of the area. I'm done.
Thank you. So it just narrows the scope of this and removes one risk factor from others that will remain present.
So, Mr. President, if it was asked as a friendly amendment, as the amendment maker, I would say no. It's very clear from hearing the hearing examiner and the process that's outlaid and the multitude of factors that are there that they need to consider, that this isn't one to highlight, to say, extrapolate this one, and therefore, you know, now the process is smooth and seamless. I would also say from a shot clock perspective, their average of 6.2 months makes, you know, is a very quick process. And so from that perspective, I couldn't, you know, see them looking to do anything faster than that. I think that that's reasonable, considering what it is that they're going to be doing, which are major projects. This isn't something that's just very simple. I mean, you know, when you're looking at doing residential solar, you know, there's a process involved there as well. And so from that standpoint, I think that it's fair. I think that it's reasonable. As you heard from Councilmember Jawando, and I couldn't agree more, it gives due process. It gives standing for folks to go in and appeal and have an appeal process if they don't like what was found. And that happens within a certain time, certain period as well. And so from that perspective, look, I think that, you know, this makes complete sense. I'd love to hear from Mr. Chris, since we've heard from industry folks, but haven't heard from the agricultural community about their thoughts on the conditional use process as well.
Just on Councilmember Rice, just on this topic of the suggested amendment to the amendment, I think the chair of the Planning Commission had a suggestion. Mr. Anderson.
Well,
you are looking very tiny.
I just got this screen installed, so I'll stand up. Maybe that'll help. I was going to suggest something more specific along the lines that Mr. Zients was suggesting that I think would maybe clarify this in a way that I don't know how Mr. Rice feels about this, but it's along the lines of what Councilmember Reamer had said, by specifying that visual effects are inherent, because that would make it clear what the standard, what standards the hearing examiner is going to use to evaluate these and which things are in bounds and out of bounds, because otherwise the hearing examiner may decide, gee, I just don't like this. And that's a very subjective, open-ended, and I see Lynn is saying I don't do that, but I'm here to tell you that these things can get tied up for months, many months. The last thing I'll say is, remember that it's the planning board staff that is staffing these hearing examiner items, which Lynn has just acknowledged. So really the difference is how much additional process is appropriate. People can make the comments to the planning board in the same way they can make it to the hearing examiner. They won't be doing it under oath over a period of several days, as sometimes happen with hearing examiner proceedings, but they will still get their day in public and they will still have the opportunity to speak to the planning staff. But mainly, I just wanted to say, if you wanted to do something to limit the discretion of the hearing examiner on visual effects, you could do that by defining in the statute visual effects as being inherent to solar.
So that's an alternative approach. I don't know if the sponsors would look more friendly upon that.
No, I think we should move forward.
All right.
Okay, Mr. Reamer, do you want to vote on your amendment or?
I'll just withdraw it.
Okay. Councilmember Albornoz.
Okay, so I guess the two most significant issues are timing and the possibility of a rejection, which may dissuade potential investors or companies looking to produce these facilities from filing their application in the first place. But if I heard Ms. Hannon correctly, there is a provision by which we can establish time constraints, which is consistent with other cases, that would help alleviate or address the concerns, understandably, that have been raised about the possibility of this extending an unreasonable amount of time. Ms. Hannon, did I hear you correctly? Did I get that right?
Yes. Now, I say that the bulk of our process is at the planning board. So I think it might affect them more. And we would have to look at the time frames to see realistically whether there are enough. I can't remember the time that Ms. Elder cited. So I would have to look at that. But yes, there's a possibility there.
Okay, and then if I also heard you correctly, you stated that approximately 90% or so of cases that come before the hearing examiner are approved. Was that correct?
I think it's probably higher than 90, but my Excel spreadsheet, I can't get the VPN. So I think it's higher.
Okay, so there's based on past practice and other policies, then it sounds like, at least based on history, there isn't a lot of evidence that a high percentage of these are in fact denied. Jeff, go ahead. Jeff has his hand up.
Just want to say what I don't know is how many were withdrawn before denial, or after the planning staff has made its recommendations or some other element. But there is some failure rate of these things.
I did get a chance, if I may speak. I did get a chance to look that up last night. In the last 5 years, I'm talking new conditional uses under the zoning ordinance, 2 were withdrawn. 1 was withdrawn because the council adopted a ZTA that eliminated the use from the zone. And that was a catering business across from the C&O Canal. So that was a council action. The second one was withdrawn because planning staff recommended denial.
Okay, so that's helpful for context as well. Just dealing with facts here. And I understand the concern, I think, Councilmember Reamer, in wanting to introduce, because I gather that you don't want there to be some arbitrary reason for denial. It's pretty straightforward that this is going to look different than what a farm or a traditional, structure would look like within the agricultural reserve. Inherently, it's going to look differently. I saw you shaking your head, Ms. Hannon, as Mr. Anderson was, reflecting on that there would be, I forgot the right term, so I don't want to put words in his mouth, but you seem to be disagreeing with the notion that, the issue of the visual may be an issue. If you could, I know this is sort of an awkward conversation, and we got to go back and look at who said what and who's on first. But I know, understandably, it looked like you were disagreeing with something that Chair Anderson was saying, and Chair Anderson was trying to add language to what Councilmember Reamer was stating. I think you understand the general point. There may be some that think this is a ruse, that maybe that poison pill has been referenced before, that would make it more difficult to proceed. Could you just kind of, not knowing a lot about your impressive operation, if you could educate me a little bit about that, and just generally what your reaction to that is, I'd appreciate it.
I agree with Jeff that the visual aspect would be considered an inherent use, an inherent aspect of the use. We are not allowed to deny for a a impact that is inherent in most cases. What made me pause, and having done so many of these quirky things, is that there may be something, depending on the type of, if I recall, there's some panels that don't reflect back the glare, or, you know, I just know that there are some things sometimes in conditional uses that nobody thinks about. So say you had a solar panel farm, and for some reason the glare was, you know, making the way the sun and the hill work, the glare was making it worse. So that is just a pure hypothetical. I'm just saying in most cases, I agree with Jeff, it would be inherent. I think if you added an amendment precluding anyone from considering it, then it would take away the ability to address some issue like that. I think for the most part, Jeff is correct that it would be the vision, just being able to see it would be inherent.
Okay.
I hope that answered your question.
No, it does. I understood where Councilmember Brewer was coming from, but I think within reason, it's already addressed in that it is inherent. Notwithstanding these unusual cases that you brought up, Ms. Hannon, that are possible, but you know, just that helps me. So thank you. Those are the questions I had for now.
Quick question.
Okay. Go ahead.
Ms. Hannon, do we need to do anything at this moment in order to achieve what you had described as possible, as far as, you know, a much more systematized and regular process? Or is that something that you can do administratively? You know, you
I'm not sure what you mean. I apologize. I'm not sure.
You said that, like, for example, the cell tower review, you know, is fairly, it's quicker. What is there any change that we need in the zoning code in order to ensure that that's the case? You said you wanted to, you could meet that kind of objective.
Mr. Zions is trying to get everyone's attention because he has the answer.
Well, what happens in the tower routine is that you foreclose the opportunity for planning staff to go to the planning board, and it goes from planning staff directly to the hearing examiner. Right now, without amendment, it's an option for hearing staff to take it to the planning board or not and get a planning board recommendation. You could foreclose that opportunity if you wished. For sure, that would make it a little bit faster. I don't know how typical it is that conditional uses go to the planning board itself, because it's permissive in the code itself. But that's one thing you could do. The other thing you could do was done already, which was a direct appeal to the circuit court. And it's not an appeal, it's a petition for judicial review. And that is in Mr. Rice's proposal, as I understand it. So, but you can do the other thing. You can also put in a requirement for planning staff review in X period of time, but then you don't know who suffers the consequences of non-performance when you do that. But certainly taking the planning board itself out of a conditional use process is possible.
I thought that's what Mr. Rice had proposed.
Not the planning board. Well, he makes it a conditional use. A conditional use requires in other sections of code that are not affected by what Mr. Rice was doing, allow it permissively to go to the planning board.
the planning board weighs in on every conditional, well, in some conditional uses, they have chosen not to. Most of the conditional uses, it does go to the planning board. And as Jeff said, it's an option. The typical conditional use would have the planning board weigh in, but there are some that they do not take to the planning board. And I'm not aware of any statute or zoning ordinance that makes that determination. I think it's typically the determination of the planning department. Do you agree, Jeff?
Yes, it clearly is a determination of the planning department unless you take away that determination.
Robert wanted to comment.
Thank you for letting me. I just wanted to weigh in real quick. This is Robert Cronenberg with the planning department. One of the primary reasons the conditional uses go to the planning board is because they go with a forest conservation plan. Those have to be approved by the planning board, not the hearing examiner. The smaller conditional uses like daycares and some of the other ones don't necessarily go to the planning board, but I would say the majority of them do before they go up to the hearing examiner with our recommendations or the planning board recommendations.
But you could take the forest conservation decision apart from the conditional use.
We could, but the majority of, we weigh in on the conditional use with the forest conservation provisions as well in terms of water quality and some of the other things. But we could, yes. It would just, I think the process would be longer, or they would have to submit the forest conservation plan ahead of time and get that approved prior to a conditional use coming in.
Yeah. Councilmember, okay, I think we've settled this. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. I appreciate the fact that we're still having a robust discussion, notwithstanding the fact that we were told the previous amendment would kill the entire purpose of the bill. So I think it reflects the fact that there still is an opportunity to move forward with allowing for some solar to move forward and to protect the integrity of the agricultural reserve and the agriculture being its primary function. And so I appreciate the fact that we're able to bring the temperature down a little bit on that conversation. I wanted to request a friendly amendment. Of course, the written amendment that was sent by Councilmember Rice was referencing where discussions were prior to the previous vote. It references class 1 soils only. From a procedural standpoint, I think the council's already expressed its intention to move with class 1, but as a friendly amendment, if we could just expressly state that
I would definitely accept that as a friendly amendment.
Prohibited. Okay.
And I agree to that as well.
Thank you. Okay, great. So I just wanted to clarify that. I imagine that's where we were headed anyway, but I think it's better to have that reflected publicly. I will just say on this, I was prepared and worked very hard during the joint committee session to move forward with the amendments that I had put forward based on the extensive conversations that I had had with all of the stakeholders from all sides. And I worked really hard to come up with what I thought was a fair and reasonable compromise based on the information that we had at the time, with my top priority being protecting soils, because soils is what makes agriculture. That's how farming works. And certainly if there's a concern for where a solar array can be placed, there's an even greater concern with whether or not crops can be harvested. And so I felt very strongly about that and been consistent on that issue. That's why I have continued to pursue that. I was ready to vote under the context of the soil amendments going through. Way back when this came to the committee, originally I made that very clear. I voted against the proposal on the singular basis of my concerns about the soils. and about what that impact would be for farmers, I was prepared to vote for the bill and what I thought was a reasonable compromise. That is not what where the body went. A lot of work has gone on since then. The idea of conditional use was a new thought of a way to provide the level of input that is seen as needed. I also have some concerns of making sure that the timeline doesn't go too long and the administrative issues don't become a total prohibition. I think Councilmember Rice has done what he can here, at least from my perspective, to try to address at least some of those issues to the greatest extent that he can. And while there are competing interests here, to me, this is the agricultural reserve, and the tie should go towards agriculture. And I feel very strongly about that we made a decision in 1980 as a county, and I say we, even though I wasn't on this green earth yet. But we made this decision as a county. I feel very strongly about, our job to protect and preserve that decision that has been viewed by many as one of the most important land conservation decisions in the country. And it doesn't mean that change shouldn't happen and can't happen, but it means that when change does happen, that the overarching value of what the agricultural reserve is and what its primary function is for should be first and foremost in our minds. I have felt strongly about that throughout. That has been the way that I have approached this from the beginning. I do think that we need to significantly ramp up our alternative energy sources, solar being one important piece of that. But again, I think when we're talking about the agricultural reserve, and there are competing interests, tie goes to agriculture and to the farmers. I will also say, as I said during the joint committee session, that we have to ask ourselves the question when we're doing policy like this, particularly when it comes to land use, what is the risk? What are we trying to do, and what are we risking? What is the unintended and potentially just natural consequence of the decision that we're making? Because we make weighty decisions here that have real serious impacts on people's lives and livelihoods. And if we do too much, we will never be able to undo the impact that we make. If we do too little, if we don't do enough, and there aren't enough opportunities to do community solar, we can come back and address that. But we can't come back and address a problem where we did too much and we realized it was a mistake. That mistake is pretty much unfixable at that point. And I think when we make decisions, particularly about things like the ag reserve, with the type of land use decisions that we've made with BLTs and TDRs and other acronyms that most people don't even understand, that these were not intended to be temporary; they were intended to be permanent. Literally, the T in BLT is termination. It's not temporary, and I take that very seriously. I think it's very important that we remember that, and I think we're doing our best here to balance these critical competing issues of how do we move forward with our ambitious goals to reduce our carbon footprint while protecting and preserving the integrity and sanctity of the agricultural reserve. I'm going to support this amendment because I think that it does that, or at least attempts to do that, and look forward to moving this forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
No, I'm good, Mr. President. Thank you. Good.
Councilmember Juando.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a brief point that I think is important. It was important for me in weighing this, and it's kind of been said, not explicitly. Councilmember Alvarez mentioned the 2 points here. Vice President Alvarez, the timing issue, which I think we've addressed sufficiently. Also, what factors are considered and the potential costs. One of the things that I think is inherent in this is, well, will it happen? And there's been a lot of talk about, will people move forward? And I have an amendment in a second that I'll talk about. But if you look at the cost of this, the risk versus reward, I think, lends towards the side that it's going to happen, and they're going to try to make it happen. If you look at what, and Director Chris can correct me, but to farm, at least an acre for a farmer, it's less than $100, right, per acre. Some of these solar farms are more than $2,000 per acre, depending on where you are, as far as what the owner of the land can lease an acre for. Those economics make it very likely that they're going to try to find a way. You add on top of that many in the solar industry are in it because they care about our environment, and they're motivated passionately to get it done because they want to make sure that we are rolling back and taking meaningful steps on climate change. So I think the statement that, well, people are going to go somewhere else, we'll see. But I think the data that's presented on those two previous points and on this point on the economics make it unlikely that that's going to happen. I think we'll see projects move forward. So I just wanted to mention that because it hadn't been explicitly said, and I think it's an important point. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Albanaus.
I was literally about to say almost exactly what Councilmember Jawando just said. So, and I know he has an amendment that speaks to another component of this, which is a point I was trying to make maybe clumsily at the very beginning, that this isn't necessarily end all be all. I mean, we assess and evaluate policies on a rolling basis. And so if it is in fact true that the measures that we're taking today make it impossible for us to be able to move forward, which I'm very skeptical of, as Councilmember Jawando is, then obviously, it will be reviewed at such time. We've done the same thing with accessory dwelling units, and I think that's a good metaphor for which I appreciate Councilmember Reamer's leadership on that issue, which has taken time for that to evolve to the point where we are now. So, trying to address another significant issue of housing in our community. 5G, another one, which I very much align with Councilmember Reamer on, and we're going to be introducing in the not too distant future. So, all of these elements come into play. And I understand, again, the passion and energy for this specific ZTA, but it can't be looked at entirely in a vacuum. And I do want to hear a lot more about the next amendment that will be introduced, because I do want to build in an opportunity for us to formally evaluate where we are in this process. So thank you. I yield back to you, Mr. President.
Okay, I don't see any other requests to speak. Nope. Okay, so we have a motion on the table from Councilmember Rice and a second from Councilmember Katz. All those in favor of Councilmember Rice's, Councilmember Zion.
Could I just say, is this a vote in concept or particular language? I did not give the full council this in legislative form. Are you acting today, or is this a work session, or do I have the opportunity to do some editorial changes to what Mr. Rice proposed in his email he sent around, and that way it could be on a website and published?
I beg your pardon, right? There's a lot going on. There's a Councilmember Rice, do you want to?
Yes, no, definitely. I mean, as we've done plenty of times before, this isn't anything new for the council, where we've given staff the clear instruction, this is how it should be drafted, the exact language, shall, therefore, all those kinds of things, things that you'll report back to us, Jeff. But I mean, it's very clear as to what the intent is at this point, and it's been shaped out, and I appreciate all of your work in getting us to that point.
Okay.
Right. And for just a fast example is, if you make this a conditional use, it's the hearing examiner who has control of the records, if you will. So it doesn't make sense for the planning board to report on activity, and so that you have these kinds of changes that I'll have to do.
Councilmember Reamer.
at one point we were talking about coming back next week for the final vote. I would certainly agree not to expand on any long conversations at that time, but I think it would be perfectly fine as Craig said, the staff to write up what we have discussed as the will of the body, such as it will be. And then we would review it in the subsequent days and then have the final vote next week.
Councilmember Rice, I think we could take a straw vote today and do the final vote upon a review of a pen and ink amendment next week.
That's perfectly fine.
Wonderful. Okay. Mr. Zients could, go ahead.
No, I was raising my hand to vote. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Jumping the gun. Mr. Zients, could you just restate the amendment as you understand that you'll write it up?
The amendment is to make solar larger than 200% of on-site use, but smaller than 2 megawatts, a conditional use and not a site plan approval use, with all of the standards and reviews that are currently listed in the site plan elements.
Excellent. Does the author of the amendment agree with all that? Any quibbles? And the seconder, I see some heads nodding. Great. Everybody understands what we're voting on. Okay, straw vote on conditional use. All those in favor, raise your hand, please. That is Councilmember Friesen, Councilmember Katz, Councilmember Joando, Councilmember Albornoz, Councilmember Rice, Councilmember Navarro. Fear not, you're just down at the bottom right. Okay, that looks like, and then that looks like 6 opponents. If you're against conditional use, please raise your hand. Councilmember Reamer, Councilmember Glass, Councilmember Hucker. Okay, great. I think that's the straw vote at 6-3. I think we can move on to the next amendment, which I believe is Councilmember Joando's.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I think the action we just took to delay the final vote till next week will help in this instance as well. But I sent around to colleagues, and I'll read it for the public, that I was going to put forward a staging amendment. I think in light of the actions we took today on soils and the conditional use, that is no longer required. And instead, I'm going to put forward an impact report amendment, which that would require 2 years after the passage in 2023. An impact report will be prepared by the Planning Department with input from the Office of Agriculture as well as community stakeholders. The report will cover topics such as the assessment of different agricultural practices on land beneath panels, impact from installations on forests, streams, and wetlands, impact on diverse communities' ability to access farming, how the availability of solar has measurably impacted agriculture generally, including any impacts on operations of lease or tenant farmers, including land prices, any measurable impact on food production, and any measurable impacts on solar provision on carbon emissions in Montgomery County and the electricity grid generally. The impact report must also report and recommend to the County Council whether the solar ZTA program should be continued, expanded, or discontinued based directly on any measurable and substantive impacts discovered in the report. So I think this is, I'd like to move this amendment. But thank you, Mr. Rice. It's important. I think we've been discussing this leading up. We don't know all the answers. It's impossible to foresee in the future, but taking a measured approach and then having a check-in point in time with information from all stakeholders will allow future councils, which hopefully I'm on, to make a decision about how we need to move forward with data that we have. So that's the amendment, and I hope folks will support it. Thank you.
Okay, so moved, and Councilmember Rice seconds, I believe. Is that you? Great. Okay, and this is the one described in your email.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
And I sent it to Jeff, and we can print it up for public in between.
Public will see it soon.
If I could get a copy, that would be good. And And just so everybody knows, this is beyond zoning. This is a request to the planning board. I could put it in the uncodified section where currently I have some reporting requirements by the planning board, but it wouldn't be it's what we would call uncodified within the legislation.
It's not
Okay.
part of the zoning code. Yeah, that's
It's not zoning.
Right, for sure. Okay,
Mr. President, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Jeff, would it be appropriate to put the racial equity and social justice part in there? Could we do that?
There's you
think
could,
about it. You don't
Yeah.
have to. If you're not sure, that's fine. We can come back to it. We'll find a place for it, but I do think that it's appropriate to find a place for it. So let's keep thinking about where that may be best, because I know it can't be in the ZTA language itself. So was just thinking, because this is non-codified, that it may be better in there. But
and that was certainly part
at least the specifics of what's going on in zoning is what the report is about, whereas the program you're trying to develop is not a physical attribute.
Okay. All right. We'll keep thinking. That's fine.
Sorry, why couldn't it be in there? It's a report. Anything can go in a report, right?
Well, I mean, one of the major racial equity considerations I included in this language was like the access for farmers of color to lease land. That's a component of it. It's not the only one, but the environmental considerations. But I would think that you could have the planning board look at all those things.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why it couldn't be included. But anyway, Jeff will think about it. Terrific. Does everybody agree on what we're voting on? Okay. We have a motion from Councilmember Jawando, a second from Councilmember Rice. All those in favor, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Great. Okay. Oh, Councilmember Reamer.
I actually didn't vote for it.
Beg your pardon.
But in the spirit of comedy, I'll go ahead and add my name in the favorable column.
It's just a report.
COMEDY.
Yeah.
Spirit of comedy. Like it.
Okay. Thank you, colleagues. Are there any other requests? Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. I was really just going to ask about the zoning text clarification. I obviously supported the reporting, but that was answered by Mr. Zients about putting it in the uncodified language. It was more of a practical question than anything. I'm glad that we're going to have a report. There are some assumptions and numbers that have been thrown around of what can and can't happen, and what the landowner willing uptake of this will be, and what the current market conditions will allow. Obviously, all those things are either subjective or subject to change, and so I think the report will allow us to sort through some of that. So I am supportive of it, and my question that I had texted to speak about has been sufficiently answered, and now we voted on it, so I won't belabor any further. Thank you.
Thanks. Councilmember Navarro.
Same. I'll just next week make further comments. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry if I missed the moment here. Okay. Lots of texts. All right. And I see no other requests to speak. I see no other amendments. Is that accurate? I see heads nodding. Okay, great. I think we have an amended bill in front of us, and I think we're going to proceed to the final vote next week. Is that all accurate, everybody? Great. Yes. Okay. I think we've disposed of this item, and we can move on to the proposed closed session. I beg your pardon. We have to counsel the interview of Ms. Harling. Sorry. Let's see. We are now going to interview the county executive's appointment for Chief Labor Relations Officer, Ms. Jennifer Harling. Is Mr. Manalino with us? Has he been patiently waiting? Welcome, Ms. Harling. We're so glad to see you. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Why don't we let Mr. Madaleno jump in when he arrives, if he comes back. We know we were behind schedule. Ms. Harling, thank you so much for your willingness to apply for this position. I have 7 questions for you, and then my colleagues may have additional questions, okay? First, can you tell us about your background and qualifications as they relate to your appointment?
Absolutely. Well, first, I just want to thank you all for your time in speaking with me today. I want to express how grateful I am for the opportunity and, of course, thank the county executive for the appointment. It's an incredible opportunity, and I very much appreciate it. Okay, I am an attorney. I have been practicing labor law for a little longer than 10 years. After law school, I started my career at the Department of Veterans Affairs. I became very active in our AFGE union local there. Moved on to working at a district level representing multiple locals in Washington, D.C. And then after a few years doing that, moved over to the National Treasury Employees Union, where I was an assistant counsel for negotiations. My responsibilities there required me to conduct national negotiations. So I was the chief negotiator for, negotiating our national master collective bargaining agreements with federal agencies. That included all midterm initiatives that were national in scope. I also represented NTEU and the bargaining unit in national litigation, grievance matters at arbitration and unfair labor practice charges, and before in mediation as well, and before administrative bodies, including the Federal Labor Relations Authority and Federal Service Impasses Panel. And that experience and knowledge is, I believe, directly applicable to the position here.
Terrific. Welcome, Mr. Madaleno. Do you mind if we just get to you at the end of the questions?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, we're running behind schedule. Ms. Harling, thank you for your answer. What do you see as your top priorities in this position?
Well, the top priority is to run an effective labor and employee relations program that represents the interests of Montgomery County. And I see a part of that as working in partnership with the labor unions, using interest-based approaches and techniques, and also working to address employee issues in order to resolve matters at the lowest level possible. And in doing that, increase efficiency, improve service, and improve the function of Montgomery County government.
Great. Can you describe a successful collective bargaining strategy, goal, or objective which you recommended, and what made it so successful?
Well, in bargaining, you've got to be creative at times. And, I have found in my practice that using interest-based techniques in which you establish a relationship with the person across the table from you, you build a relationship, you build trust, and you communicate with them effectively about their interests, their motivations, and they do the same. In those circumstances, you can meet the interests of your needs, your organizational needs, and also meet theirs as well. And at tables where we have utilized interest-based bargaining approaches and been able to sort of get creative and explore our options, we've had the best, or I should say I and my teams have had the best outcomes. Using positional techniques in bargaining exclusively or resorting exclusively to litigation is incredibly costly. And in the end, sometimes a win is actually a loss. So I keep that in mind in my practice.
Could you share an experience in which you provided an effective resolution for a difficult negotiation?
Sure, and this is sort of related to the prior question, but again, in getting creative, I was thinking, when I was looking at the questions, I was thinking of a time a few years ago when I was bargaining a RIF, a reduction in force, at one of the federal agencies that I was representing. And, of course, RIFs are incredibly impactful to employees. They're very concerned about this and how they will be affected. In addition to utilizing sort of the normal bargaining techniques and tools and looking at sort of normal standard proposals in that instance, we were able to negotiate, a phased retirement program to incentivize retirement eligible employees to, go ahead and retire and phasing them out. So it wasn't a hard cutoff. It allowed for mentorship of younger, less experienced employees, and it met the agency's needs of downsizing or right-sizing its workforce.
Thank you. Could you tell us about your experience interpreting contractual agreements for employers and employees engaged in labor relations processes?
Sure. Interpreting contractual agreements is it's foundational. It's sort of a basic everyday requirement of the job. In my practice, I'm looking at multiple master collective bargaining agreements across multiple federal agencies, interpreting those agreements. Sometimes you're looking at the bargaining history as well, where the text is not clear. And then you're also looking at agreements that have a more narrow focus. Maybe they're specific to a particular issue or a particular group of employees. But I guess I would answer, I've been doing that my whole career, and I'm very comfortable with it and very experienced in not only interpreting, but enforcing, administering the contractual language.
Thank you. Racial equity is a top priority of the County Council. What measures would you take to advance racial equity as the Chief Labor Relations Officer?
Okay, thank you for the question. Absolutely, racial equity is an incredibly important issue. I took some time to review the information on the county website. And, in this role, as a Chief Labor Relations Officer, I would reach out and work with Ms. Ward and her office to better understand the issues, to ensure that me and my staff are trained on the issues, and to ensure that this office and the work that this office does is aligned with the goals of the county with regard to racial equity and social justice.
Terrific. And finally, are there any potential conflicts of interest of which we should be aware?
No.
Great. Well, Ms. Harley, thank you so much for your answers. Mr. Manalino, let me go back to you, and maybe you could frame this interview for us.
Sure. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry, Mr. President, that I wasn't on when you started.
No worries.
One of the things that County Executive Eldridge ran on was the idea of improving relations between the executive and our labor partners and our employees. Part of that was creating the Chief Labor Relations Officer and then creating the Office of Labor Relations. I think that took a while through the first year of the administration to get all that set up. We launched interest-based bargaining as an initiative for how we're going to approach our labor partners. Certainly, McGeo jumped on board with that right away, and I had a chance working with Mr. Sluchansky to see it in action. I was pleasantly surprised with some of the issues that we were able to work to resolution using interest-based bargaining, so that when we wanted to fill this position after his retirement, we wanted someone who had that commitment to interest-based bargaining. Ms. Harling comes to us with that experience at the National Treasury Employees Union, working on bargaining across the country with various units and various departments, using the principles of interest-based bargaining. So we had that opportunity with her, and also, and I think you heard her discuss it in some of the answers to you, focusing on the day-to-day relationship with the unions. I think we tend to focus very much on the annual bargaining, the discussion around wages, benefits, workplace conditions, and not
everything that happens on a day-to-day basis in order to keep the relationship between the employees, their bargaining units, and management functioning together well. And she had demonstrated both a breadth of experience and a strong desire for actually doing that sort of work, so that we're not just seeing them and arguing with them at the annual bargaining session, but actually building that long-term relationship that makes the day-to-day operations better, which then hopefully makes, when we actually sit down for those contracts, better, because you have that trust, you have that relationship, you've built up that sense of understanding. And we believe she has the unique qualifications to help us grow that entity and to take leadership of that office with the employees who have been assembled there usually from what was once OHR, to actually develop that relationship on an ongoing basis. So I know it's late in the day and you probably don't want to hear much more from me.
That's never the case, but thank you for your thoughtfulness. Ms. Harling, thank you so much for your answers. Let me see if my colleagues have any questions. I'm not seeing any, so I think we might be good. Ms. Harling, thank you again for your willingness to serve. We're going to be able to get back to you, I believe, and announce a decision at the next council session, which will be February 2nd. Thank you so much to you and to Mr. Manalino.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, we have next on the agenda a proposed closed session to consult with our counsel to obtain legal advice pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions Article Section 3305B7, and to discuss, before a contract is awarded, a matter related to a negotiating strategy pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions Article 3305B14. The topic is a proposed global pandemic prevention center. I will need a motion to meet in a proposed closed meeting to consult with counsel to obtain legal advice pursuant to those areas of the Maryland Code. The topic is the proposed pandemic prevention center.
So moved.
We can touch a motion. Councilmember Reamer, and is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro seconded. All those in favor of the closed session on this topic, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Okay. Thank you, colleagues. We'll see you soon in the closed session.
Center at 240-777-7433.
We will continue to monitor transportation conditions throughout the